Good morning, Dr. Stevens. Can you hear me? We can hear you.
Good.
Yeah. Good evening, all, and welcome to the second session of the workshop. Today, Dr. Stevens, he is going to talk about IP due diligence. We'll start with the session right away. Dr. Stevens, you may please share your screen. My colleague will now unshare her screen.
Okay, so we're going to talk about technology and IP due diligence today. So again, thanks to all the people who have made this session possible. Oops. So I'm going to talk about what we mean by due diligence, preparing for it, the evaluation methodologies you use, and then we'll look at IP due diligence, and we'll finish up with corporate due diligence. So what do we mean by due diligence? Well, in America, we go to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, and it has two definitions. One in law, the care that a reasonable person exercises to avoid harm to other persons or their property. So he failed to exercise due diligence in trying to prevent the accident. He hadn't had the brakes of the car serviced in 3 years, let's say. And then in business, the research and analysis of a company or organization done in preparation for a business transaction, such as a corporate merger or purchase of securities. In other words, it's the process someone, the buyer, who's considering a deal with you, the seller, goes through to try and find a reason to say no, trying to identify all the things that could possibly or potentially go wrong. We've all heard that phrase, haven't we? Caveat emptor, buyer beware. It's the buyer's job to find out everything that could happen that would go wrong and cause financial and business harm to them. The seller's job is to anticipate everything the buyer will want to know and the questions they will ask. You need to have the information available. It has to be organized. You have to identify any weak spots, because they certainly will. And you need to have plans developed as to how these weak spots will be addressed. When is due diligence done? Well, it's done all the time. The potential partner, the potential investor, will remember everything you've said and will keep all the materials you've given them. So you've got to do this stuff right from the get-go. Somebody once said, you only have one opportunity to make a good first impression. But the pace of the questioning and the request for information will increase and get more intense as you get closer to closing the deal. Obviously, the buyer will put off all the hard work until you've agreed the business terms and they want to do the deal, as long as they aren't any fatal flaws. And obviously, by the time you've got to this stage of your business discussions with somebody, you will have been doing this on a confidential basis, and a non-disclosure agreement will have been in place for some time. So I think there are two types of due diligence that we come across in tech transfer. There is the due diligence that is done by a potential licensee or assignee, the party that wants to acquire rights to a technology to develop it. And then there's investor due diligence, which is due diligence done by somebody who's considering investing in a startup to develop the technology. So what are they going to do diligence on? Pretty much everything. They'll do it on the technology. They want to know, is it going to deliver the desired results? What evidence have we got of proof of principle, proof of concept, prototypes, etc.? They're going to want to look very hard at the development plan, from how we go from where we are today to when we get into the marketplace. Are the timeline to do that realistic? Are the costs to meet that timeline realistic and achievable? They're going to be particularly interested in the IP protection. They're going to want to know that if the technology works as we hope it will they be able to exclude others from invading the territory and A, keep all the territory for themselves, and B, have freedom of pricing to make sure they get a good return on their investment. They're going to want to know a different aspect of intellectual property, freedom to operate. If it works, will anybody else be able to exclude them? Will anybody have a broader patent that dominates the IP that you're going to license to them or sell to them? They're going to want to know about the market. They're going to want to know, are the sales projections realistic? And then they're going to want to know about the competition, who might beat them to market and why they won't beat them to market, but your potential partner is going to be successful and be able to keep that market for themselves. And then additional investor due diligence issues. Can the company attract the human resources it will need? How will the roles of the founders evolve? When will they need to cede their leadership roles to people with more experience of bigger companies, of the particular market sector that the company is going to operate in? Do they know that? And do they accept that? Is the fundraising plan realistic? Will the amount raised in each round get the company to the next value inflection point when the company's value will go up and you won't have to sell as many shares and dilute people to raise the next tranche of money that the company needs? Have potential investors been identified? Have they expressed any potential interest? And then one of the most important questions, how's everybody going to make their money? The exit. Is the exit plan realistic? Is the price going to give everybody a good return? What's the basis for that plan, for that price? Why do we think that we'll be able to get that price for the company? Have potential acquirers been identified? So, how is due diligence done? The buyer normally hires a number of consultants to focus on particular aspects. They'll hire scientists to look at the technology and the development plan. In life sciences, they'll hire regulatory experts to look at the clinical development plan. Are the trials well designed? Are the patient numbers that are projected going to be able to deliver meaningful results? What are going to be the costs per patient in these trials? And then they're going to hire, excuse me, they're going to hire lawyers to look at the intellectual property. The licensees, assignees will normally do the market due diligence themselves. They may hire a consulting company, and the investors will normally do financing due diligence themselves. But you can see, this is an expensive process. That's why the buyer isn't going to want to go through this until relatively late in the process, when you come to business terms and they are convinced that they want to do the deal. Now, hopefully you have done thorough evaluations of the technology and of the company, and this will prepare you for the due diligence process. So if you're licensing or assigning the IP, hopefully you've done what I call a first look technology assessment, an assessment of the IP market and competitive conditions of the technology. If we're looking at a startup company, so you're looking at investor due diligence, have you done a study of the viability of this future new company with a first look technology assessment? And you need to periodically update these assessments. After the Series A round, future rounds will be based on an updated business plan, and that will be the basis for due diligence for future rounds of investment. So, first look technology assessment. It's all about trying to work out if the technology is going to work in the real world as opposed to in the academic research laboratory, and to see if anybody will care if it does work and will want to buy it. Now, the inventing professors will have thought through the science. What they propose will be scientifically, technically feasible. But will it be practically feasible? Is there a market? Does the invention fill unmet market needs? Are we going to get a patent or other protection? What's the competition? Will it work on a large scale? That's where so many technologies fall down. They fail to scale up. Can it be made economically? What are the regulatory barriers to market entry? What's the commercial pathway to market? Are there established companies that will want to take the technology and take it to the market? Will we be able to do it ourselves? Or are we going to need to partner with somebody else as we get closer? So the first step in doing this is to get a complete description of the technology and how it translates into products and services. Talk to the inventor. Search for competing patents or prior art. Step 3, identify potential markets and competing products. Step 4, you do secondary research. This is when you look at existing sources of information and you identify end users, distributors, potential licensees. Then you go on and do primary research, which is when you pick up the telephone, or these days you start sending out emails to people who are experts and companies, particularly who should be interested in the technology. And you write a report and fill the holes if necessary, and prepare a presentation. So your objectives are to establish a positive relationship with the inventor when you sit down and talk with the PI. You need to keep the door open for follow-up questions, obtain the benefit of their thinking. They've been thinking about this for a long time. They know the market. They understand the science. They understand what it can do, how it's superior. What are the competitive approaches? You want to know their thoughts on the most attractive applications of the technology. You need to get their help on patent searching. What are the key terms to search for? What is the key elements that they have brought to this technology that makes it novel? What are the other terms that capture those same concepts? Because particularly early on in the technology, people haven't settled on accepted terms. Before we had nanotechnology, you have to use words like microchannels and things like that. Now, of course, nanotechnology, lithium-ion batteries, things like that, the technology is established. But in the early days, there can be uncertainty. What's the stage of development of the technology? What TRL level is it at? And their thoughts on where we go from here. What are the key proof of principle experiments that need to be done? How easy will it be to fund those experiments? And the report should have a technology description and a description of the products that will result, what their potential benefits are, potential commercial markets, and the evidence that you got from your primary research of potential interest in the marketplace, development status of the technology, ease of scale up, technology development plan, the intellectual property status of the technology, competing technologies and competitors, and the pathway to market. Are there potential licensees, or are we going to need to start a company? And what are the barriers to market entry? And then the commercial potential rating and the recommendation as to whether to move forward with this technology. And I think it's important. It's an important mental discipline to reduce this to a quantitative rating scheme. So the scheme that I use is the market potential carries 15%. The maturity of that market, is it slow growing or high growing? If it's fast growing, that's much more attractive, 15%. The current status of the technology, 15%. The proof of concept prototyping, how easy it's going to be, how expensive, 15%. Ease of scale up, 10%. Competitors, 15%. Patents, 15%. And you give a score from 1 to 5 of each of these, and that gives a weighted score, and you add it up. So this might be an example that you come up with of a particular technology. The market potential is good. It's a fast-growing market, so we get a 4 there. The technology is not very far advanced, so it only gets a 2. But it's going to be easy to do proof of concept and prototyping, so we get a 4. We don't know much about the ease of scale up yet, so it gets a 2. Competitors, it's kind of middle of the road, and we do think we have a good prospect of getting patents. So you can see out of a potential 5, we finish up with a 3.2. You tend to find that technologies tend to fall in a range of, they don't get much below 1.75, and you rarely get much above 4 or 4.25, and they tend to cluster around 2.5 to 3 to 3.5.
Can you take an example, Ashley, on that one, and with the kind of questions you would frame against each of those metrics?
Well, the market potential. How big is this market? Are we going to be able to see substantial sales? If we are, you get a 4 or a 5. If it's a smaller market, you get a 2 or a 3 or even a 1. Questions like that. The market maturity, how fast is it growing? Is it growing 20, 30, 40, 50% a year? That's good. It's easy to make your way into a market that's growing fast. It's much harder to make your way into a market that's stable, not growing very fast at all, because the existing players will resist your entry fiercely. So if it's growing and you can get sales without taking them away from anybody, they just don't grow as fast as they might otherwise have done. That's, again, the sort of conditions that you would give a high ranking.
Can I ask one other question which has come up in the chat box, which is, how did the investors miss this for, say, Theranos?
I'm sorry, say that again.
The question is about Theranos, and how did they miss it, when they were looking at technology assessments or due diligence? What happens in such situations? How could they miss out on whether the technology works or not?
Yeah. Elizabeth Holmes was very controlling. There was clearly fraud that's been established. Interestingly, some of the, she was convicted, I think, on 3 charges of fraud and acquitted on 3 charges of fraud. And the one she was acquitted on was where the investors had asked for more information she refused to give it, and they went ahead and invested anyway. So caveat emptor. Those people, if they thought the information they were requesting was important, they should not have invested unless they got it. But I think she just spun such a great story. You know, how anybody said, how credible is this woman when she dropped out of Stanford and doesn't even have a bachelor's degree? How can she raise $1 billion without a bachelor's degree? And she didn't seem to have any very heavyweight members of her scientific advisory board. You know, it's a fascinating story. I've read one of the books on her, and I think everybody should read that. It's a object lesson. But you're right, it was an amazing story. I think I've seen 2 movies and read 1 book because I've been as fascinated as the question is.
Yeah,
it's clearly one of the massive failures of due diligence. $1 billion evaporated.
And are there situations where, of course, in an academic tech transfer office, you should have a lot more transparency, I presume. But when you're talking about companies and due diligence, what are the kind of would the investors look for? I mean, there will be limitations to whether they can scan the entire know-how or not, right? You can still have a part of the know-how which may not be accessible. You might see some patterns and be convinced that it's good enough, or some documents and some papers, but there might still be parts of the know-how which might be hidden. And also some companies are in stealth mode, so to say. So it sort of is hard to get to that information, isn't it?
Yes, you know, the disclosure of unpatented technical information is always a sensitive subject. And I think you have to approach that on a case-by-case basis. You know, you show the ingredients, but not the relative proportions of the ingredients, something like that. You show the test results without having shown what went in, the precise details of what went in to be tested. But that's the sort of area where there's going to be a lot of back and forth. If you do disclose your know-how, I think you need to write it down and say, this is confidential, send it to them. And then if you subsequently, if they don't do the deal, and suddenly, miraculously, a year later, they've reinvented it themselves, then that's when you challenge them.
Okay. Actually, there are a couple more questions, quick questions. Perhaps we can just take them and then move to the next, continue with this. One is, do you have a preferred range of weighted scores which you consider acceptable? I do understand there'll be differences there. And the second question is about, how do you look at competition? Because no competitors and too many competitors both could indicate, bad things, right? So.
Yeah. So the first question, do I have preferred outcomes? I think you need to be very skeptical if you come out below 2.5. I like to see well over 3, 3.5. That's where, you know, you're essentially saying there's a 2/3 chance this is going to work. Whereas if you come out below 2.5, you're saying more likely this will fail than succeed. Okay. But I think it is, as well as the answer, it's the process of getting to the answer that is important. It makes sure that you asked all the right questions and have got answers, or you've identified, I can't answer that. And then you have to say, well, how do I answer it? Because somebody's going to want to know. On the competitive front, if there are no competitors, that just means you haven't done your homework properly. If an opportunity is attractive, there will be competitors, and you just need to find them. Okay? As Bill Gates used to say, the smartest people in the world don't work for Microsoft. They work for somebody else. Okay? And other people will be smarter than you, will be thinking about this and trying to get to the same outcome. You just got to find them. Now, it's a big question. You know, is it good news that a big company is interested in the marketplace, or is it bad news? It's probably good news because small companies can be much more agile. And you see that in all of the big new generations of technology. You know, the companies that dominated semiconductors weren't the people that dominated the old electric vacuum tubes. Tesla is a brand new startup, and all the existing car companies are racing to play catch up. You can look at the pharmaceutical industry. You know, there have been major new pharmaceutical companies born from biotechnology. The seed industry was revolutionized by genetically modified seeds. So a small company can frequently beat the established giants who are too entrenched in their marketplace and, you know, are skeptical. They think their technology is the best, and they're skeptical that this new unproven stuff can ever beat it. And that gives a window of opportunity for a new young startup company. If there's a lot of competition, then it just comes down to, you know, how can you differentiate yourself? What is your unique edge? Is it your IP? Is it your investor base? Is it your partner base? You know, each situation is different.
Yeah. When would you give it 5?
Oh, you've got to be very sure to get a 5. I mean, on patents, okay, you get a 5 once the patent issues.
No, competitors, when would you give it 5? Small field, not too competitive, but
have I ever seen a 5 for competition? I'm not sure I have.
Okay, sure. Let's continue, Ashley. Sorry for the interruption. Okay. Yeah, please.
So, you know, there's only 4 outcomes of your evaluation of a technology. Yes, let's go ahead. Well, maybe let's go ahead if this, and this works out. Or, nah, I think I'm going to kill this unless this, and this happen to be true. And then finally, I'm going to drive a silver stake through its heart. This thing is never going to work. So the process, I think a proper evaluation like this of an academic technology emerging from the lab generally takes about 10 to 20 hours of work. You need to work with the academic inventor prior to and during the process. You need to show it to the professor before you give it to anybody. Allow him or her to disagree and or correct any of your errors. And if you're not going to go ahead, then unless they can point to an error in your process or your information, then they have to agree with you on the fact that this is not going to work out. And hopefully that will send them back to the laboratory to continue trying to improve it, or even to say, okay, that's a dead end, and to start on something new, and to come back and see you with something new in 2 or 3 years. And then, you know, you share this with the academic institutions management, patent committee, et cetera, et cetera. Now, if you're contemplating doing a startup, then the process is a little different. we do what is called a first look venture assessment. It answers the question, are this technology and the market addresses broad enough and deep enough to found and sustain a company to develop it? The answer is yes. Then the first look venture assessment is a precursor to the first draft of the new ventures business plan. If the answer is no, then it provides a critique and identifies the next risk reduction steps that could make this technology the foundation for a viable business. So there are strategic issues. It makes you conceptualize the business, makes you formulate a business development strategy. Quantitative. Now, it's incredibly difficult at the stage that a technology is just emerging from an academic laboratory to be very quantitative. I think the importance is to identify the key assumptions. Is it cost of goods? Is it speed to marketplace? What are the key concepts that will make or break this company? And then you want to look and find some comparable companies you can look at that you can get data on and use that for benchmarking. It helps you identify the risks and the fatal flaws. First, obviously, you need to build on a thorough investigation of the technology itself through a first look technology assessment. Key issues: how disruptive is this technology? How will this technology translate into products or services? Is there a big enough and fast enough growing market demand for these products and services to sustain a company? Will you be able to attract the right management team? What's the technical development plan? Can I get to market while the opportunity still exists? Because in some sectors, speed to market is absolutely critical. And if it isn't going to be the basis for a new venture, but there's promise in the technology, then what are we going to do with it instead? Technology development, what's it going to cost to get from here to there? How are we going to find the money to do that? Is the cost of the development justified by the market opportunity and the potential return? Market. What's a realistic market forecast? And particularly, what is the addressable segment of the total market? If you have a cure for one particular form of cancer, then your addressable market isn't the entire market for cancer drugs. It's that particular patient population that has your particular type of cancer, and what are they being treated with now, and what magnitude of improvement in treatment do you need to get for them to be treated with your drug instead? The addressable segment of the market. Its volume, its pricing. How will you access and sell into that market? What strategic partnerships will you need to form along the way, and when? Quantitative. How high a price will the market tolerate and still make the product a success? What will be the cost to produce the product? Important to distinguish fixed and variable costs. One of the key concepts in startup finance is the time to break even and cash flow neutrality, because that defines the total amount of money you're going to have to raise. Allows volume sensitivity analysis. What if I can sell twice as much? Or more likely, what if I can only sell half as much? I remember probably 40 years ago, we were raising money in the City of London for a very early stage British biotech. And we raised the money, and the company went off, and for 2 or 3 months, 4 months perhaps, beavered away at it. And then we had a critical board meeting with the investors. And at the end of the meeting, the lead investor leant back in his chair and looked at the ceiling and said, typical startup, Costs, right on target. Revenues, half of forecast. So, you've got to do a good volume forecast, and you've got to know what happens if you fall short. You don't have to worry too much about what if you exceed it, that's good news. But what's going to happen if you fall short? By difference, what will the contribution margin of the product be at that pricing? How much will it bring in at the price that you sell it for? What will the company overhead cost be? And probably want to use percentages from comparable companies. If you can get access to public small companies operating in that segment, that will be a very useful benchmark for you. And what will the company's overall profitability and cash flow be? W.C. Fields once said, first let's talk about return of capital, and then we can talk about return on capital. So let's talk about capital. Who's going to be prepared to invest the amount that's necessary, and in what stages? How can capital needs be staged so that you raise greater sums of money when the value of the company is higher, so that you don't have to give up as much ownership stake to raise a given amount of money? You want to do it in stages. You need to identify key value added points, because those will become financing milestones. If you're developing a drug, when you start to do your preclinical testing, your toxicology, animal studies, things like that, that's a key value inflection point. When you enter human clinical trials with phase 1, that's another value inflection point, and so on. And you always want to add a margin of safety. Don't raise twice as much as you think you're going to need to get to the milestone, but certainly 25% as much, because you do not want to have to go back to your investors and say, guys, sorry, almost there. We just need to raise a bit more money to finish. They will brutalize you if you get to that stage. So some realistic margin of safety. So how can you minimize those capital needs? Are there grants that you can get? Can you sell some product early? Are there, in the US, one of the main government supports for innovation in small companies is the Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer Research grants, which, a grant is just something you're given. You don't have to pay it back, and you don't have to give up equity for it. We call that non-dilutive financing. Another way you can get it is through a partnership with a big company, out-licensing secondary applications, out-licensing secondary markets, and partnering the primary applications. And then the big question, how will management and investors achieve liquidity? What's the exit going to be? And then your contingency analysis. Assuming success, what do I do next? Assuming the first product idea fails, what do I do next? And as I just said, what do things look like if costs are spot on target and the market is only half of forecast? And we talk in the US about Murphy's Law, which is kind of probably a racist Irish joke about what could go wrong with a young company, because by and large, in small companies, most of the surprises you get are nasty ones, not nice ones. What else can we do to improve the venture's prospects? So you need to develop a plan for the steps needed to launch the company's products, develop the sales forecast, cost of goods sold, operating costs, carry out a break-even analysis, identify the financing needs and how they'll be met, identify the management team needs of the company, and what will be the exit. You can see this really is a precursor of the company's business plan. And then this is the stages in the report that we write when we do this in my class. And I think it's a good exercise to do in the real world. And again, a quantitative analysis. Early market opportunity. Can we get something into the marketplace early? 10%. The technology development plan, 10%. Competitors and patents, 15%. Capital needs, 10%. Time to break even, 5%. If it's a good opportunity, you should be able to raise additional money if it's time to get to break even. Ease of financing, 15%. The long-term profitability, 5%. Ability to attract management, 10%. And the most important issue is the exit. It's strange to say that the first question you should ask yourself before you say, I'm going to start this new company, is how do I get out of this new company? What's my exit? Because that's the only reason people will come and work for you. And the only reason people will invest in you is if they can see clearly how they're going to make a return on their investment or a return on their effort. Let's talk about IP due diligence. 2 levels of analysis, patentability. That's about us and our technology, the likelihood of getting our patent issued. Prior art, obviousness. And then there's freedom to operate, which is all about them. Are there other people out there with dominating patents? Will we need a license to them to be able to practice our patent? And we address the first issues in our first look technology assessment, and we look at the freedom to operate issues in our first look venture analysis assessment. So on the patentability, on the prior art, repeat the original prior art search and use alternative search terms for key concepts. We once had a technology for a minimally invasive surgical device where you steered a needle into the abdominal cavity. So a steerable needle, we found interesting stuff when we used the term manipulator instead. As I said, nanowires, microchannels, thin channels, things like that. Identify critical scientific phrases. Identify major academic labs or company labs that you know are active in the area and search by authors and inventors. Identify there are major companies in the area and explore their websites. If you're in a pioneering invention, you're with little related art, you need to search as broadly as possible. Use any field to look for terms. Use as few terms as possible. If it's a well-populated field where there's a great deal of art, then you need to design a highly specific search. Use very restricted fields, the abstract, the title, the claims. Include as many terms as possible. And then don't forget the mechanics of the patenting process. Have all the inventors assign their interest to the applicant. If the invention's made at a university, are there good records of who worked on the project that resulted in the invention? Have all the required filings been made on time? Missing reports, responses to office actions, information disclosure statements, foreign filings claiming priority to the parent case, were they filed on time? Have all the fees been timely paid in both domestic and international patent offices? Filing fees, fees for extension of time, issue fees, maintenance fees, and so on. Have the lawyers been paid, both in the home country and their foreign associates who've been applying for patents in foreign countries? Contractual issues. Did the university have the right to own the invention? In the US, was it federally funded? If the original invention wasn't federally funded, did it later become federally funded? As the term is in the Bayh-Dole Act, conceived of or first actually reduced to practice? Did the university go through the steps necessary to get the rights to the invention from the government? Did they elect title? Are there federal rights stated in the patent? Does the university own the entire right, title, and interest? Have all the inventors assigned their interest to the university? Have they all signed the university's patent policy? Were any inventors omitted? Really critical. Often you find there's been a grad student or a postdoc involved early on. And by the time we come to do national phase entry, they've gone back to their home country, their university email account's been shut down, and we can't find them. That's a particular problem we used to find at BU with inventors from China. Students. Do the students fall under the patent policy? Does anybody else have any rights to it? Are there material transfer agreements for materials used in the work that gave some rights in the invention to other people? Are there any prior sponsors of the research? Have their rights expired? Have they acknowledged that their rights have expired? Was funding obtained from a foundation which has a restrictive policy that might claim an ownership interest, or that they've retained a financial interest, although that will be the university's problem, not yours? Are there limitations on licensing? For a while, the American Cancer Society would only allow exclusive licenses for 5 years. That's important to know. Are there collaborators at other universities? So look at publications that describe the work and ask why there are co-authors who aren't also named as co-inventors. Why are they not considered to have made an inventive contribution? Why not? Did any of these prior people receive an option or a right of first refusal? And have these options or rights of first refusal expired? A very wise lawyer I once worked with said, "I hate rights of first refusal." What they mean is, you tell somebody, well, if I get another interest in it, you always have a chance, an opportunity to match that offer. That makes it very difficult to do business with somebody else. You explore it in good faith, and at the last minute you say, sorry, I've got to give this person the opportunity to get the rights on these terms. And if they do, then that person has wasted all their effort. So be very careful about giving rights of first refusal. The important thing about ownership is that all co-owners have an equal right to practice the patent without accounting to the others, in the US at least. In other words, absent a pre-existing interinstitutional agreement, an exclusive license is no longer exclusive under US patent law. Freedom to operate, it's also called an infringement analysis or a patent clearance. It asks the question, does anyone have a patent that completely dominates ours? Requires a much more detailed analysis than a patentability analysis. What are the broader patents? We have to find them. And then we have to look and see whether our method practices every element of the broader claims. And it's expensive. If a law firm is going to give you this freedom to operate opinion, they're putting their name on the line. And if it's later wrong and you're later sued for patent infringement, you will turn around and sue the law firm. So they take very good care before they put their name on a freedom to operate analysis. Universities generally license their IP with an explicit disclaimer that they aren't representing and warranting that their IP can be practiced without infringing the rights of others. And the initial licensee has to carry out this analysis. Now, by the time that licensee comes to sublicense the technology, those sublicensees will expect that freedom to operate analysis to have been done and to have been kept updated, and they want to receive reps and warranties that they can practice without infringing the rights of others. If they're wrong, there'll be an infringement suit, which is massively expensive, and the company will likely be uninvestable until the suit is resolved or settled. Very famous example. It's not commonly known that Google did not invent the auction system for advertising words that is the foundation of its financing. That was invented by a company called GoTo.com, which changed its name to Overture. And when Google was filing to go public, they sued Google for infringement, because by now you could get patents on methods of doing business. And Google had to settle the suit. I think by the time it was settled, Overture had been bought by Yahoo, and Yahoo finished up getting a large chunk of stock in Google at the IPO, because that was the price of settling the lawsuit so that Google could go public. Obviously, they're now one of the five biggest companies in the world. It was a good deal to do, but it held up the initial public offering. And then company due diligence. The potential investors are going to want to review all of the corporate documents that you've got. They'll want to look at your incorporation. They'll want to look at your articles of incorporation, your bylaws, your operating licenses. They'll want to look at your shareholders, share purchase agreements, shareholders agreements if you need them, capitalization tables, that should have said, sorry. They'll want to look at your governance, the minutes of all board meetings, details of your directors. They'll want to look at the employment records of the company, all of your employment agreements. Make sure you have confidentiality agreements with all of your employees. And if anybody has left, that you had an exit interview with them, inform them that there are obligations of confidentiality going forward, non-compete if there are any, and any letters that you sent to them documenting those terms. And then your consultants, similarly, your consulting agreements, confidentiality agreements with those consultants, and any reports that consultants have provided to you. So that's a rather daunting overview. It's daunting, but it's necessary. It involves a mound of paperwork. These days, obviously, electronic records. And you'll probably need to use some sort of data room to make this information available. You know, perhaps a Dropbox system, something like that will be adequate. But develop your records and keep them current as you go through both the technology development process and the company development process. Questions?
Thank you, Dr. Stevens, for such a thorough IP due diligence and the other sessions of company due diligence. I think it's really helpful. You were saying something, Dr. Premna?
There's somebody's phone, which is, I mean, computer seems to be on. So I was just trying to see if we can mute it. Sorry, it's okay. Please continue.
Please feel free to type in your questions or raise your hand. The session is now open for questions.
There's a question which relates to mathematical formulas that can enhance business be patented. Of course, that's a patent related question, not strictly relevant to this topic here, but do you want to take that on, Ashley, which is about mathematical formula that can enhance business be patented, perhaps in the context of what you talked about Google and so on and so forth?
So I think this is getting harder. One of the things you can't patent is a law of nature. And there is a tendency for people to say that, you know, mathematical formulas are laws of nature. You need to look at the Alice decision of the US Supreme Court. Another issue that's coming along now is, can an artificial intelligence computer program be an inventor on a patent? And that is a topic of very active discussion. And I'm sure in the finest traditions of American business, it will be resolved by litigation. But I think the jury is out on that one at the moment.
Yep. Some countries have allowed it and some have not, right?
Yep.
There's another question. Due diligence to me seems like more of an experiential matter. What is the best way to learn the ways of due diligence?
I think it's one of those learning by doing. It's only when you've gone through it once that you understand just what ridiculous reasons investors might find why they're not going to invest. Sometimes they seem crazy, but there you are. It's, as I said, due diligence is the process of finding reasons not to do something.
By the way, sometimes they do have obligations to their investors also, right? Which require them to carry out certain exercises and demonstrate that they have met all of those requirements. Especially if they are venture capital investors who have other investors putting their money into it. Right. Okay, there's another question here on how do you tackle situations where somebody is deceiving you in sense with the information that they're providing. A prospective licensee is deceiving a licensee or licensor. Ravi, do you want to clarify that on the chat box? Person licensing it or the person receiving it? Are you talking about once you get the in terms of royalty reports and audits, that audited information? Is that what you mean? Okay, so he's talking, I think, about licensee. So I think this must relate to the fact that you have obligations which relate to royalties and so on and so forth, and the person who is not being too honest about it. So how do you deal with such a situation?
Well, I thought of including a segment on this, but after you've done a license agreement, in the immortal words of Ronald Reagan, you need to trust your licensee, but then you need to verify. So the right to audit a license is absolutely critical. Don't compromise. You must have the right to audit. The company is probably going to insist that the licensor not do the audit themselves, but they hire a professional company, a certified public accountant, a CPA, and there are specialist CPA firms that specialize in auditing royalty reports. And they will go in, they will review the records. If you're getting a percentage of net sales, then they will ask the company to produce the evidence to support the sales volume that they're claiming, and then all the deductions that are allowable to go from gross sales to net sales, returns, shipping, freight, insurance, things like that, import taxes, so forth. And then they will complete that inspection and tell you whether the company has correctly reported the royalties they owe you. If there are milestone events, they will review the agreement with the sub-licensee and say, okay, has this milestone event, has this milestone been met? And did they receive a payment? And had they given you your appropriate share of that payment? So it's a very critical stage in managing your licenses. I've seen it said that if you're getting royalties of $1 million or more, you should audit every 3 years. Typically, your right to audit will only last for 3 years after the year in question. And that's generally because tax authorities only require companies to keep their detailed business records for 3 years. And so generally, your audit period aligns with the tax authorities' requirements on the company. So if you're getting $1 million or more, you should audit every 3 years. And if you get $5 million or more, you should audit every year. It's not an adversarial process. It's just keeping the company on their toes. They won't be offended. They will understand.
Actually, there's a question about, when you, your points on FTO probably, how can one estimate the degree of dependence of a patent on a prior existing dominating patent held by a large company competitor and negotiate an optimal scheme of royalties in favor of a startup holding the former narrower patent? And does it happen?
I mean, if a big company has something that dominates you, they may want to get rights to your product in return for a license. Maybe they'll want rights in one market in return for giving you rights in other markets. It's on a case-by-case basis, but it's very, very important to identify that up front. You don't want to go through all the process and the day that you get your FDA approval, the next day a lawsuit arrives accusing you of infringement.
Of course, if you don't have anything to offer, the person can refuse, right? So then you're stuck completely.
Yeah, but
how do you bring them to the negotiating table?
Yeah. You have the product that you're developing. Otherwise, you wouldn't be interested in their patent. So you always have something. Is there some market segment you can give them rights in and keep another market segment for yourself?
Another question is about licensing with returns in kind. So is it possible to get technology licensing returns as in kind instead of cash? And if so, what could it be, and what are the pros and cons of the kind of in kind returns?
Well, your license agreement should specify that if your licensee gets something other than cash in return for product, then they have to estimate the fair market value of what they get and give you your royalty percentage of that. And that's something that your auditor would come up with.
I also think the question was also about, say, if you're an academic organization and somebody wants to license it and they offer you an in-kind benefit, is that something which is possible? For example, access to an instrument.
Yeah, I mean, I once did a deal at BU where some company gave us a piece of equipment they no longer needed as part of the deal. So yeah, you can do those things. You've got issues of maintenance, and sometimes equipment that comes from companies is too big for the scale of operations in academia. We did have those issues.
What are the components of IP and tech due diligence important for the company? I think you've covered quite a lot of that, so I'm not sure what exactly is the question.
I think Mr. Mahale, he joined in late, I suppose that's why, because most of the things were covered in the talk itself.
Okay. And there's a last question on cross licensing and probably also with respect to in-kind maybe, or bartering rights. Do you want to comment on that?
A cross license is certainly a getting something else in kind. I once worked on a technology that had been extensively licensed non-exclusively, and then a few of the licenses were cross licenses, and it was my observation I'm not sure I've ever seen this written in a textbook or in an academic article, but the royalty rates in cross licenses are half those in one-way licenses, which is taking into account and crediting the value that the company issuing the license is getting from the license they're getting back.
Ashley, as you said, in due diligence, people might be trying to find ways to shoot it down. Also, they might be trying to shoot your value down, isn't it? In terms of the value that you can claim out of it.
Yep.
Are there good practices for academic institutions in terms of documentation and all of preparation, advance of negotiations?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, academic institutions tend to have worse records, but even academics are supposed to keep good laboratory notebooks and have them witnessed and signed by others. Certainly, company scientists do this. They may even have, notebooks with duplicate sheets in which, they can take one copy out and it's recorded in a central location and they keep the other copy. But an academic that wants to commercialize needs to take particularly good care of the documentation of the students and postdocs and laboratory technicians that work on the technology, as well as the professor's own lab notebook, where they record their ideas.
Okay. I think we'll close with this last question here, which is on, do you have any suggestions for books and reference material for learning a little bit more about licensing and due diligence?
Let me think about that, and I'll send you a few suggestions, okay?
Sure. Thank you very much, Ashley. I think that was very useful. Over to you, Pragnya, to close the session.
Yeah, that was a really wonderful session and a very thorough session. I hope all the participants have benefited a lot. And looking at the questions, it was quite an interactive session. So I think most of them are looking forward for the recording of the event and the slides that you presented. So I will request all the participants to kindly give their feedback in the form link that we have posted, and you'll be getting the recording link that we have created for both the sessions yesterday and today. So thanks a lot, Dr. Stevens, for both the sessions yesterday and today. And with this, we will close the 2-day workshop on technology valuation and IP due diligence. Thanks a lot, Dr. Stevens.
Thank you, Ashley.
I will send you copies of the slides, okay?
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Ashley.
Yeah.
Catch up later. Yeah, thank you. Bye.